Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Football, presented by John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group. I'm your host, Blake Monroe, where I'm joined by Bobby Burton and Jerry Hamilton. And Super Bowl was one for the ages, went into overtime, and man, I mean, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What did y'all think?
I loved it. I thought it was a boring game. In the first half and most of the third quarter. Now, boring is relative, right? Yeah. You're a Kansas City or 49ers fan. And then the fourth quarter, the back and forth began, right? They tried to match each other and get that going. And, at the end of the day, one team had Pat Mahomes, the other didn't. That's really what it came down to, in my opinion.
My biggest takeaway was how difficult it actually is to win a championship. I mean, how many football games, the three of us and everybody on this live stream or on Coffee and Football, have you watched in your life and that punt comes close to hitting somebody's foot, comes close to hitting that guy, but it doesn't? And you're like, they replay it and said, oh man, just miss, fire, didn't hit him. I mean, it is so difficult to win a championship, especially when the other team's got one of the greatest players that's going to have ever played. I mean, that's the whole deal right there, right? And I'm not making this a golf show at all. That reminded me of when Phil Mickelson just was going against Tiger, and Tiger was just better. You can't, if he had an opportunity, he was going to run with it. It is so hard to win a championship. That was my takeaway, because the 49ers had the better roster. 1 through 53 or whatever you want. They have more Hall of Famers, future Hall of Famers on their team. I think maybe it may be a wash there, but I mean, Trent Williams is a Hall of Famer. Christian McCaffrey is going to be a Hall of Fame player. Nick Bosa is going to be a Hall of Fame player. They got at least 3. KC may have 3 as well. There's some young guys.
I think has 4.
McDuffie, if he goes on and stays healthy for his career. So it may end up being 4-4 when all's said and done. But, I mean, San Francisco had a little bit of better roster, I would say, top to bottom. I mean, their defensive line was what I thought was unbelievable about the way they played Mahomes, which I thought they did about as good a job as you could do, was Bosa played such disciplined football from an edge position that he turned everything back into to what's his name's big long arms, right? And it affected pass enough of that. Yeah, yes, who they call the blueprint. It turned everything back into him, who stayed at home and was disciplined and used his length to affect things. So that game to me, and you just watch Kyle Shanahan walk off the field at the end of that game, and you said, that's really how difficult it is to win a championship. That's why when you have looks at it, you got to capitalize.
Yeah. Hey, you talk about Shanahan, 44 years old.
Yep.
Okay. 44 years old, University of Texas grad, played wide receiver with Chris Sims when he was there at Texas. My take on it is similar to Jerry's. I feel ultimately one team had Pat Mahomes and the other team didn't. You can say what you want, but Pat Mahomes, Travis Kelce, when the chips were on the line, they went and scored, period. And didn't have any kind of – and I don't think – Kyle Shanahan was not out-coached.
No.
And Andy Reid's – somebody just mentioned in the chat. Andy Reid's a Hall of Fame coach too, Jerry. You got to put that on.
No doubt.
And so he didn't get out-coached. They got outplayed by the thinnest of margins. The other guy that's going to be a Hall of Famer is Chris Jones.
No doubt.
From the interior. I mean, look, without his pass rush, the Chiefs don't have a pass rush.
Right. And he did it on one leg, essentially.
What an amazing player he is. But Travis Kelce, Pat Mahomes, and Chris Jones, nobody affected the game more than they did, period. As good as Trent Williams is, as good as McCaffrey is, and how many times third and 7, third and medium, they ran those little crossing routes,
Yeah. Hey, by the way, we got to tell our Chris Jones story because we have The first time we told this Chris Jones story, we probably had 8,000 people on Texas football. Now we're closing on 37,000. So this was way back in the day at 24/7 Sports. Somebody Bobby knew in Mississippi called him and said, hey, there's a guy down in Mississippi, big defensive lineman. He may be the best prospect in the state. So Bobby comes over to me and he's like, hey, why don't you need to go take a look at this guy. Somebody I've known for years says he's a tremendous prospect. And I went down to rural Mississippi where Chris Jones was. And we ranked him at 24/7 Sports, the number 2 player in America. Shortly after that. And the reason I bring this up is not to pat ourselves on the back about a ranking. It's because the recruitment and what Texas is headed into in recruiting. This is why this strikes me with Chris Jones. Chris Jones played for a high school that was all Mississippi State guys, staff. They essentially were hiding him from other colleges as long as possible. Ole Miss was in on it. They knew, okay. But it got to a point where Chris Jones, then we kind of blew him up because we ranked him high, right? That's the business. So then Ole Miss is all in. Alabama tries, and I mean, I don't know. I think one of their assistant coaches got pulled over for going 6 above the speed limit somewhere across the state line. But that was what you're dealing with in SEC recruiting, especially in the state of Mississippi. Man, they will hide guys. They will try to influence recruitment. It's an interesting area. It's a difficult area to recruit in. But Chris Jones is one of my favorite stories, Bobby, from all those years, because he was an unknown in a world of there's not many.
He wasn't even a 3-star, Jerry.
He wasn't ranked.
He wasn't ranked. He wasn't anything.
No.
We put him back. Jerry sent me a picture, literally. Jerry goes down there the week after I tell him about him. Jerry goes down there and sends me a picture. And if you can imagine a guy that is 6'4.5", 6'5",
yep,
and has a wingspan the size of, I don't even know what to tell you. At that time, he was probably 6'5", 235, 240, something
yep,
like that. And you knew he was going to be 6'5", 315, and still look just as
skinny ankles. Yeah, all of it.
Oh yeah, but you actually know how I got that name? It was Texas went to play Ole Miss in Oxford. Okay. So I used to know the Oxford High School head football coach back in the day. And so I actually talked to him. I go, well, who are the best players down here this year? He goes, oh, Chris Jones. I'm sitting there Googling, Chris Jones, not in any database, nothing.
Right.
Like, who the f is Chris Jones? He goes, oh, I think he's unbelievable. And I go, and this is a guy, by the way, that used to help do some recruiting for Ole Miss, et cetera. And he goes, he's unbelievable. And sure enough, I go, Jerry, I've never seen this kid. All I know is this coach is telling me this kid's unbelievable. Not good, right, not great, unbelievable. And so he ended up being a top 10 ranked player in America within a week of being an unknown.
And here's the crazy thing. You know who was 1 and 3 in that class by a lot of rankings? It may have changed. People go back and look at it. Robert Kimdichie was 1. We had ranked 1. Chris Jones 2. Reuben Foster 3. And here's what that told you at the time. And it still rings true in recruiting. Who's going to maximize their talent? Because I'm here to tell you, Robert Kimdichie had every bit as much as Chris Jones did as a talent. Reuben Foster, as a linebacker, had every much a talent as Kimdichie and Chris Jones had at his position. Who's going to maximize your talent? Chris Jones has maximized his talent. Kimdichie and Reuben Foster did not. And where are they now? All three guys should have been
Foster
playing.
had some injury issues.
Yeah.
Foster and injury and luck plays
well, and he had us off the field too.
Yep. No, he did. He did.
I mean, both those guys
also
had
have
off
some
the
news.
field stuff.
Hey, I also have some news I want to say here real quick. And I wrote this article this morning on Texas football. I'm being told by a high-ranking source at the University of Texas that the Longhorns are not even contemplating playing any Big 12 teams in football or basketball for the foreseeable future. Now, a lot of people thought that would be the case, but I'm here to tell you that it is the case, and it includes basketball now too, Jerry.
Yeah.
And so be on the lookout for that. Nobody's really reported it that it's that heavy, but I'm being told that some things that were said in the preseason by the commissioner, the deputy commissioner that we talked about here on this programming is going to, let's just put it this way, not going to do it. So anyways, that's where it's at. And what I was told yesterday, actually. So news there. I do not expect Texas to schedule it. And Texas Tech was aiming for another game. So was Baylor and TCU and all these other teams. Not going to happen. Iowa State, out. So just realize that there are a couple of teams that they don't have any animosity towards, by the way, but I don't see them doing anything of the sort, and that's from about as high as it can come.
Wow, big is there for sure, no doubt about it. And
yep.
Somebody in the chat asked. Somebody early in the chat asked, "Who's the next to commit to Texas?" Here's my answer to that. Steve Sarkisian, somebody will commit to Texas when Sark's ready to take a commitment or push for a commitment. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of guys come in for around the spring practice, around the spring game, April 20th. I think that's really going to be the next true traction you see in recruiting here. Because I do think this about Sark. I think they're going to use the spring evaluation period. I put up a little story on maybe an overview on TexasFootball.com this morning. The 19 offers in the 2025 class made in January through February 2nd when the coaches were on the road. 19 new offers. A lot of those guys haven't been to campus yet, right? So I think Texas is going to see how many of these guys they can get to campus that they liked in the spring as they continue to kind of move their board around, continue to evaluate this, right? I mean, Coach Nansen, Kenny Baker, they're just starting to get to know some of these guys that Texas had already offered in the 25 class, plus guys they like on tape, maybe a little bit different, maybe a little different more. So it's going to be interesting to see where things go, who Texas really pushes for. I think who gets on campus in March and for the spring game is going to be telling. Remember this, Brandon Baker was not really interested in Texas a year ago this time. Now, his teammate DeAndre Carter came in for one of the January junior days, went back to Mater Day, had good things to say. When did Texas get Brandon Baker on campus? Spring game. And then he ends up signing with Texas. So that's just kind of remember that about Texas recruiting under Steve Sarkisian. They play the long game, and some people would say the ultra long game. But for a lot of these guys in 2025 that they now like, especially with the new coaches coming in, the staff changes on defense, the real pushes for these guys haven't really even begun yet. They're going to begin in March and April at the spring game, headed in the spring evaluation period, then June official visits.
Well, we'll talk some more recruiting here in a second. But before we do that, Bobby, I'm going to let you tell folks out there about John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group.
Yeah, absolutely. The Longhorn Wealth team wants to congratulate our fellow Longhorn, Charles Amenahue, for his victory last night as part of the Kansas City Super Bowl Chief winning team. We pray that Charles has a speedy recovery and full recovery from the knee injury he suffered in the AFC Championship game. But we are proud to that he played a key role in helping his team get to the Super Bowl and give them the chance to become champions. Speaking of champions, that is exactly what John Donovan brings to the table as a certified financial planner who has spent over 30 years providing championship-level investment, retirement, insurance, and estate planning services and solutions to his clients. So please give John and the Longhorn Wealth team a call at 972-707-4900 or visit longhornwealth.net for a free 90-minute consultation to explore how they can help you maximize and protect your tax-efficient retirement income to help you live the retirement of a champion. Thanks, John, for your sponsorship of On Texas Football.
Hey, Jeff Carey, good point here. What Bobby was talking about earlier. For Texas football, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. You're going to the SEC. doesn't matter if you don't play the teams from Texas. Basketball is going to be a little more interesting because the Big 12 is going to be the dominant basketball league in the country in college basketball. So if Texas doesn't play Houston, any of those teams anymore, any Big 12 teams anymore, look, their schedule is actually going to take a little bit of a hit in the future. That will be interesting because the Big 12 is going to dominate basketball.
But
it doesn't matter.
I know what I've been told. I mean,
Yep.
Look, is SMU part of that? They weren't part of they're the ACC. That's Dallas. Rice is in Houston.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying they're going to play they don't need to play in Waco. That doesn't really do anything.
No.
Out west Texas, no offense to folks from Waco or West Texas, but it doesn't really bring a lot of recruits to the arena, so to speak. And so I don't feel like it's that big a deal as some people might make it in basketball. Although the Kansas game, obviously a perennial national power. Baylor has been
Arizona. Both Arizonas are now going to be in the Big 12. Colorado, Utah. So you're taking out.
They haven't played those guys.
No, but I think moving forward, remember like Texas, Arizona. When TJ got to Texas, Arizona were awesome games in basketball, right? And I think that was a team that had been talked about maybe in the building a little bit. But hey, it's all part of it. Texas and just go head east. Go start get North Carolina, get Duke on the schedule again, get some of those ACC teams on the schedule. As long as there's an ACC.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, Jerry. We talk about going to the SEC helping football recruiting. Do you think it will hurt basketball recruiting?
A little slightly, yes, I do. Because look, I think the Big 12 is going to be such a dominant league in basketball, especially bringing in Arizona. While Arizona State's not a great team, it's still Bobby Hurley and Arizona State coming with Arizona. The guy at Colorado does a great job. And with USC and UCLA moving to the Big 10, I think California is wide open in basketball recruiting. So I think it hurts a little bit because the Big 12 is going to be such a dominant conference in basketball. And all those schools are going to recruit that against you, the Houstons, the Baylors, Kansas, when they come recruit in Texas. Now, you may only sign one guy a year from Texas because 3 guys in a high school class and 3 guys out of the portal. But it definitely is going to make it a little more difficult in my estimation.
Very interesting for sure. Well, before we start taking questions, I want to read this comment here from Mike D. He says, "Good morning, UT family. Great weekend for the Longhorn sports, women and men's basketball and softball too. UT softball beating UCLA, who's ranked number 8, twice, 3-2 and 16-0. Congrats and hook 'em." It was a good weekend. And golf and swimming also had a good week, or tennis had good weekends.
The women's softball team ruled UCLA in that second game.
No.
They're off to a good start. Mike White, the New Zealand guy that was on our show last week or week before last, he was excited. You could tell. I think he may have some pitching this year, even more than what he had a year ago. And that, as we all know, that really is what rules the roost in softball.
Yeah. So through their first 4 games, they outscored their opponents 54-3. And that includes playing number 8 UCLA twice. I mean, that's
the best thing for Chip Kelly is he didn't have to watch either one of them. He was in Columbus. Hey, Bobby, I wasn't on the live stream Friday when all that went down. I think we got to revisit that with our coffee and football crowd. Did you ever think you'd see the day in college football where a head coach of a program like UCLA would say, F it, I'm out. I'm going to go be the OC at Ohio State for my former quarterback? I never thought I would see that day in college football.
So we've seen it. We've seen it elsewhere. Like the Buffalo head coach just went to be part of the Alabama staff. But that's going from a MAC coach. I mean, Nick Saban left being the head coach at Toledo, I think, or Kent State to be the defense coordinator of the Browns. I mean, things like that happen. But UCLA,
that's unbelievable to me. On the surface,
I mean, at what point do you look, if you're a UCLA fan, and say, why am I even a fan?
Does that feel like the death penalty in a way for the UCLA fan base? Just like our head coach left a Power 5 job, we're going to the Big 10 to go be the OC of a Big 10 school.
I want to say this.
It feels like the death penalty if I'm a fan.
I want to say this. So I talked to some folks in the coaching fraternity over the weekend, as I'm wont to do. I call, we just catch up and shoot the breeze. And they said that the reason he did this, NIL.
Yeah. And
he's got enough money, he doesn't give a crap anymore.
Yeah.
He just wants to be happy.
Yep.
And some people were like, some people in the chat were saying, well, he's going to be the fox in the hen house at Ohio State. Nobody felt that way because Ryan Day played for Chip Kelly at New Hampshire. So nobody thinks that way or is thinking that way. They think he may, launch into another job, but not be the guy at Ohio State if Day doesn't get it done. And so they were just like, UCLA is a difficult situation because USC's in your backyard and they're willing to do NIL. UCLA is willing to do NIL in basketball, apparently, but not really football.
I mean, good luck.
Despite getting ready to get a $70, $80 million paycheck from the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point do you say, okay, cut the players in on it and let's just all figure this out? That's what needs to happen. But of course, it's not happening right now. And for that, there's going to be some haves and have-nots. And unbelievably, UCLA right now in football is a have-not. Unbelievable.
Yep. Never thought I'd see the day.
Another thing we haven't talked about on Coffee and Football, and thank you to Colton Martinez for bringing this up, Gary Patterson to Baylor. Did y'all see that coming?
I mean, yeah, here's the thing I'll say about that. Obviously, Patterson and the Browns do not get along. Kendall Browse, as the TCU OC, serves as motivation for Gary to go help Baylor. It's interesting how that's flipped.
I know it's the truth. I mentioned that here. Here's the other interesting thing. I was told about a month ago that he was going to go work for another Big 12 team, but didn't want to tell people who it was. So word didn't leak out. This is why. If he was going to help Joey McGuire, word would have leaked out. But going to help Baylor, different story. He's got a statue in front of the stadium at TCU. At what point do you say, maybe we take the statue down, coach? We'll put it back up once you stop parading at our perennial, when you stop. Why don't you just go take a job at, Arkansas or LSU or somewhere where we don't play you? But he took a job at Texas and now Baylor.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if he were to take a job at Rice, they wouldn't care. But he's kind of flaunting it right now.
Here's the thing, too. I'll tell you why it's smart by Gary to do this is, look, he probably came close at the U of H job to really being in it, right? I think if he can go kind of help resurrect Dave Aranda a little bit when everybody thinks Aranda's done, he can help resurrect that a little bit. That might get him a head coaching job somewhere in the Big 12. That might be the thing he needs. I don't think so because of age, but you never know.
Who's their quarterback?
Yeah, they got a max transfer.
I mean, and so you can't. It's hard to resurrect things when you ain't got a quarterback. Texas has been there, by the way.
The blue bonnet battle is real. I love it, Colton.
We're going to talk about one other school real quick because Mock Snell says, what effect do the two former Washington coaches leaving Bama for Seattle have? It was the OC and OL coach, offensive line and offensive.
I actually think OL coach is more impactful. I mean, I know people are like, well, this guy's been Kalen DeBoer's. Kalen DeBoer's won wherever he goes. He's going to win. The question is, he's going to win at Alabama. The question is he going to win a national championship at Alabama? The guy's going to win. If people don't think he's not going to win, just look at his resume. He wins wherever he goes. That doesn't mean he's not going into a difficult situation, but that guy, he's a winner. Winners win. I mean, he's going to win. It doesn't matter. He's going to have good quarterbacks. He's going to evaluate that position. He'll call the plays. He'll do things he's always done, right? I mean, Ryan Grubb called plays, but look, DeBoer's mind is dominant in all of this. Alabama will be fine there. I think offensive line coach is a tough one to replace that continuity So it'll be very interesting to see who he hires on the offensive line, because it's probably going to be somebody that hasn't been in his system for years. So that, to me, that's the bigger hire than the OC.
It's not like he did everything with Ryan Grubb. I mean, I'm just sitting here. They weren't even on the same staff when he was at Sioux Falls.
Right.
And where he started this run. He wasn't on the staff at Indiana when he turned Michael Penix around as a true freshman.
Exactly.
I mean, and so I agree with Jerry. While I believe that Ryan Grubb is a good football coach,
yes,
no doubts about that. I think that the offensive line coach is a little bit different because they understand the scheme of what they're trying to do on offense and support it very well. And Jerry mentioned the continuity of that, not having to explain to your offensive line coach what you need in game situations can be the difference in winning and losing. That's why you see offensive line coaches follow guys around and they kind of become symbiotic. The head coach and the offensive line coach. Just that's my take on that.
Okay, Jason Fox says, since Georgia and Florida are now conference opponents, who would you like to replace them with in the non-conference games they were scheduled for in the future?
UCLA, that seems like an easy part. I'll start there.
Look, I think the other thing I would say is that Texas is going to have 8 conference opponents this year. I think going forward, the SEC is going to have 9. There's only going to be room for 3 non-cons.
What's interesting, too, about not playing the Big 12 teams in football is I would have liked to see in a Texas schedule a game against an Arizona and go play in Tempe against Arizona State, right? You want to recruit that state or play home and home with guys.
They want 7 home games a year minimum.
Yeah.
Chris Del Conte wants 7. You're going to see them play UTEP, UTSA, Louisiana Monroe, Louisiana Lafayette, those sorts of teams. Maybe Southern Miss, where they kind of do regional teams that are Division I, but not major Division I. That's what you'll see in the future, I think. After they get through this onslaught of Michigan, Ohio State back to back to back to back. They're going to play 9-game schedule in 25 in the SEC and play Ohio State.
Yeah.
Bobby, Jeremy has a question for you. He says, will the Hex Rally start back up for the Aggie game like back in the day?
I don't know if y'all were that's a great question, Jeremy. I have no clue what the athletic department has planned for that, but that was always hilarious. Back in the day, the football team would get up on the steps of the tower leading to it, and kind of a couple of guys would say a couple of things. I was there one time when Britt Hager, who was a little bit of a crazy man, got up and had some choice things to say about the Aggies. But no, I don't know what they've got planned. It'll be fun. Rekindling that rivalry is big to everybody around the state. I just wrote an article actually for a magazine that's going to be coming out in this summer. And it was about how the state of Texas has missed this rivalry. It's not just the University of Texas. It's not just Texas A&M. Although I think that some of us could care less whether you play A&M. You just want a rival that the thing was, for 90-something years, there was no bigger rivalry that just encapsulated the state of Texas. Okay? The Cowboys had the Eagles or the Giants, right? The Astros and the Rangers, they didn't really have a rivalry until maybe the last 10 years, right? The Spurs and there was no real basketball rivalry. Nobody. And so Texas A&M was it. Okay. And Texas is a sports crazed state that favors football over on a grander scale over every other sport. Okay. We lost that. The Cowboys never played the Oilers or the Texans. There was never a rivalry there. This was actually a rivalry that was settled on the field, and we've taken it away now for 12, 13 years. And I personally think that was taking away more talk in the coffee shops among fans. That kind of stuff like this, Jerry.
Look, I'll give you a perfect example. I was in East Texas last week in a number of coaches' offices. One of the fun things early in my years in this business is when I'd go to Kilgore High School on a Friday, right? And they had a game, okay? And you're hanging out in the coach's office there, and 3 of those coaches are Texas fans, 3 or 4 of those coaches are A&M fans, a couple of those guys are LSU fans. And they're kind of a little back and forth trash talk. You don't really get that A&M and Texas trash talk for the last decade, like in things you normally would get. And I really do think it helped open up the state in recruiting. Not as much the move to the SEC. The move to the SEC coupled with A&M and Texas not playing is what really did it. Because when you have a great rivalry in state, that does push kids a little bit harder to stay in state. I mean, it's different because state of Alabama doesn't produce as many prospects. They may produce as many high-end prospects, though. But that Alabama-Auburn, I mean, Georgia's breaks through with that a little bit when Kirby went to Georgia. But, man, it's different when you have that in-state rivalry, and those kids hear about it every day. A kid can be in his coach's office at Mansfield, whatever high school, and he might listen to a conversation about A&M and Texas, the rivalry. It matters. And kids haven't heard that for more than a decade now in the state of Texas. I think it's a great thing for recruiting for both A&M and Texas. And who doesn't want to keep more guys in state if possible? And 1 or 2 guys a year matters because that's 8 over a 4-year period if they're some of the best players in the state. But, that matters. That's going to matter for A&M and Texas.
We were talking about the schedule just a moment ago, so I want to go over to this question from the ontexasfootball.com forums from Texas fan in Georgia. And he says, should we continue scheduling a marquee non-conference game? Why or why not?
Man, I can tell you why not. You go play 9 conference games in the SEC, and you want to add Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State or USC on top of that? Clemson, man, that's getting yourself. Look, I think Mac Brown had this vision of doing that, and that's one of the reasons Texas had a problem getting itself out of its way. He went and played Maryland and Cal and lost games. Went 0 for 4 out of conference. 0 for 4 against those teams. So don't get me wrong. That's why you don't do it, because when you're not at your peak, you lose those games because those teams circle those games against Texas.
I think it's going to be interesting moving forward to see the first 2 or 3 years of this 12-team playoff, how many 3-loss teams get in. I think that's going to kind of affect how people schedule. Is kind of how the 12-team playoff unfolds moving forward. If you have 2 or 3-loss teams in, if that's possible, I think that can bring more marquee games in. If you're not totally penalized for that, if you lose to Michigan and you go 9-3 and you make the college football playoff, well then, strength of schedule, you get credit for that. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out with the playoff and how many 3-loss teams get in.
All right, guys. Well, it is time for Jerry to make the return of Manscaped. Let's hear it, Jerry.
Hey, 2024 is here in full swing, and that means it's time for a New Year's resolution check-in with our friends at Manscaped. It's never too late to level up your grooming game and keep your brush tame. Manscaped's new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra is every man's cheat code to look good, feel good, and turn the page on confidence this year. Whether you're going for a trim or that clean-shaven look, this trimmer has you covered. Trusted by over 10 million men worldwide, now is your time to get a grip on your grooming with our new exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use OnTexas, all caps, for 20% off plus free shipping. Hey, guys, the ball is dropped, but don't drop the ball on your balls. Manscaped on Texas for 20% off.
It's been a while.
It's been too long. I will say this: they had Super Bowl commercials yesterday,
as they should.
Yeah, so I don't feel quite as cringy as maybe I could. You know, they had Super Bowl commercials.
Oh, all right. Let's get to some more questions here. And let's talk recruiting for a little bit.
Yeah.
Antoine says, how is Texas looking with Smith Orogbo and Landon Rink?
I think it's a great question because, and I'm going to follow this up, add in Chad Woodfork, because there's been some talk about an RPM pick for Chad Woodfork that switched back and forth. Well, here's the thing. Texas is still evaluating these guys. I mean, so that's the one thing to know. Texas is not pushing to get many guys in the boat right now at all. There's a probably 10, 12 guys that could call if they decided to end their recruitment today, and the commitment would be taken. But otherwise, look, Sark wants to get these guys on campus. Smith Orogbo is a great one. Jeff Banks goes by Leif Hastings, offers him 6'5", 215. I was by Hastings in high in early January. Saw Smith Orogbo. Longer frame, a little bit bigger frame than the Chad Woodfork, who Texas brought in the January 20 Junior Day. So this is kind of what we're talking about. And it's kind of a perfect segue to that is those are two guys who continue to be evaluated. Who's gonna fit the mold long term with the frame? Texas hasn't had Orogbo on campus yet. He'll be on campus in March or April, right? So that's why you go slow in this recruiting process. That's why you play the long game. That's one of those edge offers that was made where A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, all those guys have offered him now, right? That's the way the game goes. If one offers, the other two are going to offer. But that's another guy who's popped onto the radar at the edge position. You have Lance Jackson. You like Camoran Morgan, who's now at South Oak Cliff, moved from Red Oak. He was originally a South Oak Cliff kid. But then you're evaluating that position. And I'm willing to bet there'll be an out-of-state offer made in May at that position when the staff's on the road evaluating players. Landon Rink, great motor. Bobby and I did a video on D-line that will be coming out. But Landon Rink, great motor. Where does he fall on that Texas board? I mean, they went and offered 2 out-of-state guys in February. Josiah Sharma at Folsom, Myron Charles at Port Charlotte. I actually talked to Myron Charles Sunday. Now, I don't know how much traction Texas will get there. I think Jeff Banks was in the area. He's top 100, 150 kid in the country, and I think he went to see him and made the offer. Sharma says he's going to visit in March or April, right? So there's a lot of guys on the board at D-line. Kenny Baker did go see Landon Rink. I believe that was his first stop driving from Austin to Houston. He went to see Landon Rink, Floyd Guidry at Spring, Chase Sims at Richmond Randall, and then Carmelo Brooks at Katy Pato that first day on the road. Then he went and saw Zion Williams day 2 before going up to Dallas. So Landon Rink's in that mix. Where's he at? Is he as high on the board as a Brandon Brown committed to Texas? Josiah Sharma, Floyd Guidry, some of those guys. I think we'll have to see. I think Oklahoma has made Landon Rink a priority more than Texas has to this point.
Interesting.
I'm going to say this. I think I wrote an article over the weekend called Sark's Way, and get used to it, guys. He's not trying to fill up the boat right now. It's not a race that he's running a marathon, not a sprint. And so other teams are going to run sprints because they got to get while the getting's good. They don't have any leverage. They don't have a University of Texas logo behind them. They didn't just play in the college football playoff. They're sprinting to get theirs. Texas is not doing that right now. They're trying to get the best players possible. They take Chad Woodfork, just to give you an example, and take Smith Orogbo off it effectively takes Smith Orogbo off the table for them. Well, they haven't even seen Smith Orogbo. The whole staff hasn't seen him in person because he didn't come to junior day.
They haven't got his hand wingspan. They haven't measured him yet.
So
they haven't spent time with him.
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Why would you handicap yourself? That Sark does not do that. I mean, he doesn't box himself in. Mac Brown used to box himself in and did it on purpose so he didn't have to recruit later, to be honest. Why would you box yourself in this early if you hold some of the proverbial cards? You don't hold all of them. I'm not trying to say you hold all of them. Okay. But you hold enough that you play this out. And frankly, and like I wrote in the article, Sark's done freaking pretty good at doing this. So why would you not just keep playing that card? Playing the game and playing the hand the same way. I definitely would. I think he's got this. Look, there are certain things there are individual situations where I can say, I disagree with Sark on that. Or I disagree with how they handled this recruitment. Or I disagree on this. Okay. But if you look in the macro, and you can't say from a overall stance where you've seen something go in this Texas program from a recruiting perspective, you've got to trust this guy and what he's done. It's ridiculous.
Here's why I like what Sark's long game in recruiting, because guys don't develop on the same timeline.
Absolutely.
And the reality of this is, a guy like Chad Wardford hurt his knee last spring, right? So he wasn't the same player early in the season as he was late in the season. Okay. So that was an injury. Smith Orogbo wasn't on anybody's radar this time last year, right? He was at Hastings, a program. The staff does a good job, but they've struggled there in the A-Leaf schools for years, right? They opened up Taylor. The kids have been recruited out of A-Leaf, quite frankly. And so it's a program that doesn't get as much foot traffic as it used to, right? But these guys physically, too, develop on different timelines. I always go back to Trevor Gooseby. Trevor Gooseby wasn't a take for Texas when he went to Under Armour camp in spring of his junior year. Okay, Trevor Gooseby was an athletic guy, basketball, football guy with upside, but he wasn't an offer take for Texas at that time. He was 6'6" and change and 268. He's now 6'8", 315. So just think, the guys don't develop on the same timeline. Your skill guys that are really good at an early age, those guys pretty much, Ryan Williams, you pretty much know, right, Bobby? You pretty much know where those guys are headed. But your big, large humans, your big humans, those guys' frames develop on a different timeline. So if you're too early to make decisions nowadays as a blue blood power school, you're making a mistake, in my estimation. I believe partially that's why you've seen Clemson take a dip.
Yeah, they went too early.
Too early. Dabo, it's a more talented roster than Mac's later years, don't get me wrong, but he's kind of done what Mac did at Texas with more talented players on his roster. He's gone all in on a lot of guys early, and there's just too many good football players around the country. And if you're going to be a national program recruiting nationally, you cannot box yourself in early, because the last thing Steve Sarkisian wants to do as the head coach at Texas is take 4 guys in the state of Texas commitments early and then cut them late. It's fine to recruit out of state, but it's not where you get into some issues is if you take commitments early from guys in state, then find somebody better out of state and cut those kids. That's not the situation you want to get into.
Or take those kids in state and can't go get Brandon Baker when he wants to come.
That's right. It goes back to what I said earlier. Brandon Baker, he doesn't visit until the spring game of last year. That's when
Texas was. He was at that the on 3
NIL
party, so to speak. I don't even know how to say it. It was a gathering of the 5 stars. It wasn't even a workout or et cetera. It was just an NIL symposium, and he was talking Georgia, Ohio State, USC. He wasn't even talking Texas. Yeah, he wasn't even talking Texas at the time.
Yep.
Well, while we're on the subject of scholarship offers and prospects, let's take this question from Ekim. He says, do you see a push to make all football scholarship offers committable to all prospects?
The recruiting process would have to change greatly, because here's the problem. So it's twofold. Colleges offer kids at too young of an age, right? But from the recruit perspective, what's really changed about recruiting is you have to offer these guys to stay in the game. So if a 7-on-7 team is going to make a 6-school tour and they go to these places and their best players get offered by 4 schools, but two of these schools like, nah, we're not going to offer these kids that early. Well, you lose out on some kids like that. So the process is flawed a little bit, guys. And I get it, but all offers are not going to be committable. The thing I've always said about recruiting is is if a kid has 40 offers, very few of those guys can call 40 schools and actually commit. I mean, that's just a reality, right? There's very few guys who, if their profile anywhere shows 35 or 40 offers, they could call all those schools and those schools would take their commitment today, February 12th. There's not a lot of those guys. But you have to get kids on campus if you're the colleges. And if you're not willing to offer these guys early and just throw the offer out there, the offer is to get kids on campus. Think about how many guys Nick Saban offered at Alabama. The offer was to get you to campus so he could evaluate you fully and then decide who he really wants in his class. Texas success is enabling Sark to do the same thing.
Let me ask you this, Jerry. This is a question. I agree with you, first of all. So you and I are on the same page 100%. Okay. How do you justify or rectify then also taking 2026 commits like they did?
Yeah.
And Racine Guillory. So how do you marry those two ideas? You know that guy's good enough and you want him, or you know what? We realize it's 2 years out and he may get, longing eyes somewhere else like Aaron Hampton did.
Yeah.
Is that how you justify the two situations? Because I agree, you can't. 2025 is upon us. 2026 is in the offing, yet they've taken a commitment there.
Yeah.
So how do you mesh the two lines of thinking? Because I agree with you.
Yeah, I think if you see a guy, a Racine Guillory commit this early, that means that Chashard Choice thinks this guy is extremely elite, right, at his position. You're not burning one of your two running back takes, and especially taking a guy that early, that may affect you getting a second guy in a way as well if you sign two backs in 25. So to answer your question, I'm not sure there's a perfect answer for that, but I think if you take a 2026 early that's not a quarterback, you think that guy's a very elite prospect.
Well, they did it last year with KJ Lacey.
Correct. Quarterback's different, right?
Yeah, quarterback's different animal because you got to, if you know that guy, then you go on that guy.
Yeah.
Who do you think is going to be the 25 quarterback or 26 quarterback at this point? 25 KJ Lacey.
Yeah, so that's 26 is interesting. So I know two guys in Texas for sure, and there's going to be a lot. But I've come across two guys that have said that I was told AJ Milway's going to go watch throw in the spring evaluation period. That is the quarterback at Grand Oaks, Grant Smith, about 6'3", 210. I saw him at a 7-on-7 a couple of weekends ago. Big arm kid, first-year starter at Grand Oaks last year. Big hands, 10.5-inch hands, big, good-looking kid. Then the other's Jet Surratt at Carthage, which I was there last Thursday. And I'm not comparing him because when you say the word, people run with it. But I do get Colt McCoy vibes with Jet Surratt a little bit. As an athlete, as an instinctive quarterback, as an instinctive athlete, the accuracy to all parts of the field, the anticipation, the athleticism, and the leadership. Just there's some vibes there. I'm not saying he's going to be that good of a player, right? That remains to be seen. But that's two guys for sure that they're going to go watch. I think AJ Milway's spring evaluations are huge. Then you're going to see them decide who they're going to bring into the elite camp in early June. That's where KJ Lacey committed last year.
And then you have Will Griffin out of Tampa. There's probably other guys that are
who was at the junior day.
Yeah, in that category. So that's quarterback for 2026. And by the way, Grand Oaks, for those of it, that's a new school in spring.
Yes.
And so if you haven't heard of that one before, it's down in the Houston area, North Houston.
That's that growth, that continued growth east of 45 there in the spring area.
It's just like there's a new high school in Frisco every week, it seems like.
Somebody asked about Caden Barker at Galveston Ball. He'll be a guy they go watch. Look, Caden Barker was at Clear Falls, I believe, that maybe dad or mom is UTMB. So they moved down to Galveston Island. He goes to Galveston Ball. Good young player.
We're going to go back to the conversation we were just having. Mike G says, on the flip side, how often does Texas lose very good prospects because they don't push earlier? There are a few I can think of the past couple of years.
This is a great question because it all depends on how good you are at the time. When Texas was just treading water, yeah. But if you're in a power position, you don't lose those guys. You can come back on those guys. I mean, think about how many guys that Nick Saban, flipped late or was in on late that came in on later. So if you're in the playoffs and you're having guys drafted and you have that resume that Sark's building at Texas, you can do some work late. You can get in on some guys late. Guys, maybe feelings aren't hurt as bad if it's a school that's one of the very top in the country and they see is a way to get path to the NFL. I mean, that's just the reality. If you're sitting there and you're 7-6, 6-7, 7-6, and you're still a flagship program in a state, sorry, Mike Elko, and you can lose out on some at that point in time.
Look, I'm just looking down the list right now. Who has Texas lost out on at this point in the state of Texas for 2025? There are 2 that have committed elsewhere that they have really wanted. DeCorian Moore, the wide receiver out of Duncanville,
which is still in the balance.
I know, who they continue to recruit.
Yeah.
And Ryan Foji, the offensive lineman out of Bridgeland.
And then Devin Sanchez, Ohio State.
Devin Sanchez, that's 3. I haven't got down to the defense, that part. But I'm just looking at that, and that's 3.
Yep.
That's not a big number. Now, are they going to lose more than that? Obviously.
Yes.
I mean, that's the way it is. But it's not this overwhelming number.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, too. We had this discussion last week. Texas signed 3 of the top 10, depending on whose rankings you saw. We'll look at in the 24. I think this is something very important to remember. In these big-time states that produce a lot of guys where populations moved into those states, a lot of growth in DFW, Houston, Atlanta area, Kirby's only signing 3 to 4 out of the top 10 in Georgia, and he's won 2 national titles in 38 of 39 games. The days of dominating a state are over. It's not going to happen, especially when you recruit nationally, because there may going to be 3 guys ranked in that top 10 that Sark's going to say, well, I like this guy, Brandon Baker, more than an offensive tackle, or I like this running back more than Reuben Owens and CJ Baxter. So you're going to remove yourself from 3 of those top 10 to begin with. So then you're really looking at signing 3 of 7. And Terry Bussey's a tremendous player. Did Texas miss? We'll find out in 4 years. They were never all in on him. They never were.
They thought he was a corner, not a wide receiver, right. And he wanted to be a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, that's recruiting. So Kirby can't take them all, and he's not going to take them all. And he's not going to win them all.
One caveat to everything you just said. The state of Louisiana.
Right.
It is the most provincial state as far as keeping kids home, which is one of the crazy things about Texas getting not only Wardell Mack, but Derek Williams, Arch Manning from the state. You realize that LSU signed 9 of the top 10 players in the state of Louisiana last year? 9 of the top 10, Jerry. That's the one caveat state. Even Ohio State doesn't keep 9 of the top 10.
Yeah.
Louisiana is provincial in that way, and it always has been. And it's one of the reasons why Nick Saban wanted that LSU job back in the day and what he made it into. By the way, the one of the top 10 that went elsewhere, Wardell Mack, University of Texas.
And by the way, Brian Kelly got to LSU. He was going to do things his way. But you know why he's such a really good football coach? And look, everybody else won a national title at LSU. We'll see if he does. But you know what he did? This is what makes him really good. Really good coaches adapt, right? He said, oops, I might have been wrong. You go get Corey Raymond, because he started listening to Frank Wilson. Frank said, hold on now. That's not how things have traditionally gone and been successful at LSU in recruiting. What do? They bring Corey Raymond back. They get Bo Davis in there. So guys that went to LSU, the LSU ties, the state of Louisiana ties. Brian Kelly's taken a different approach in recruiting now his home state that he's now coaching in. And you saw it with Jabari Antoine. Corey Raymond, one of his very, very best friends in life, is the head coach at Westgate High. So for Texas fans that love Derek Williams, be glad Brian Kelly didn't do that at first. Right out of the gate. Because they've changed. Brian Kelly's caught on to what he has to do to maximize in recruiting in his home state.
All right, guys. Let's take this question from Champ Bailey 3. He says, with Dorian Brew trending to Texas, how many more defensive backs does Texas take, and who's high on the list?
I would say just the trending stuff. Just let's just see how things play out. Okay, Ohio State's not dead in the water. A lot of things can play out. I think Dorian Brew not committing on January 24th to Ohio State was very good news for Texas, Oregon, USC, whoever else is in the mix. Do I like where Texas is sitting? I like where they're sitting today a lot better than I did in mid-January. I'll say that. But see how this thing plays out. The other DBs, I think. Look, it's kind of on Texas football. Some of the guys I mentioned that they just offered, they're really looking out of state at safety. They would love to have Jonah Williams, Oklahoma lean, right? We'll see what happens there. But they've really offered some out of state guys. I would bet they extend an offer in Arizona in the coming weeks or month, Bobby, out there. So they're looking nationally at that DB position. They like some guys in state. Obviously, they're going to keep evaluating. We've named some of those guys. Caleb Chester, right, at Fort Bend Marshall's a guy who has a cover corner. Texas has real interest in. But I think you're going to see like an offer to a Dallas Golden at Tampa Berkeley Prep. Now, I think he's a Notre Dame lean over Florida, Clemson, Georgia. But can Texas get these kids on campus? It's kind of what we were talking about earlier. If they can get 2 or 3 of these guys on campus, that could change the course of a recruitment, just like Brandon Baker and some other guys in the past have here under Stark. So we'll have to see.
We'll talk some more recruiting here in a second. But first, Bobby, tell folks out there about John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group.
Yeah, absolutely. John's a proud Texas Ex, a life member who has served more than 15 years as a Texas Ex's board member. He and his wife and all 6 of his siblings are also proud UT grads. So it is this deep UT connection that led John to brand his firm Longhorn Wealth and dedicate it to providing total wealth management for Texas alums, employees, family, and friends. Please give John and his Longhorn Wealth team a call at 972-707-4900 or visit longhornwealth.net for a free 90-minute consultation to explore how they can help you maximize and protect your tax-efficient retirement income to help you live the retirement of a champion. That's John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth, 972-707-4900.
Hey, I want to say one other thing to kind of on Sark and the approach to long game recruiting. Think about an early NFL mock draft before a season every year. Have you ever gone back and looked at how many of those guys actually change over the course of a season? I think this is the way Sark approaches recruiting. Think about how much their board in 25 before the season has changed now. And it's still months from these guys being able to sign. And you're still, we have February, March, April, May. You're still 4 months from official visits. I mean, the spring evaluation is 2 months away, more than 2 months away. So just always think about that. The NFL mock draft every year. Go back and look at how much those change. And that's at the professional level. Now think about the college level.
I love it. I think it's a great, because we all have seen the preseason mock drafts and how there's like, of the 32 guys that I guarantee you go back, somebody needs to go back and look at this. Of the 32 guys that ESPN put out, or whoever you want to take, preseason this year, how many end up being actual first round draft picks in just 9 months' time?
Yeah,
by the way, because it's August through April, and that's less time actually than what Texas has before the next signing day. Texas has 11 months to go.
And I'll add this into it. Why it does correlate with an NFL draft, mock draft. Because some people would say, nobody knew Byron Murphy was going to be this good. Well, so think about this. Ryan Williams is reclassified from 25 to 24. Julian Lewis, a quarterback, is going from 26 to 25. You're going to see more of these top guys, too. These very top guys, whether you agree with it or not. We had a great discussion about it last week. You're going to see more guys trying to reclass in the future, too, because of NIL. So Texas isn't just looking at guys in the 25 class right now. What if there's a great 26 that I don't know about, Bobby doesn't know about, we don't even know about yet, that Texas is hearing through the grapevine, well, this guy might actually reclass to 25. So the recruiting game has changed so much that it is similar to an NFL mock draft early, because Ryan Williams wasn't in your draft at the beginning of 24, but he ended up being the number 1 receiver in your draft, or number 2 behind Jeremiah Smith.
Great point. We'll take a couple more recruiting questions, then we'll get on to some team ones. Just real quick here. Jay Early 07 says, are there any recruits to watch out for in the Panhandle in the near future?
Oh, yeah. I'll say one. Odessa. Oh, I got to look if Permian or High has a 2026 offensive guard. I think he committed to Tech early. I think he's got a chance to be a top 100 national guy. I think he's actually at Permian. I'll bring up his name in a second. I will not be able to pronounce it, but I watched tape early in the season, and I thought the guy was tremendous in 2026 and will be a national offensive line recruit. Wolford Friendship as a receiver, Leighton Stone, I believe, committed to Texas Tech. He is a pretty good prospect now. I think he is probably a guy that's going to be always under-recruited because of where he's at. There may not be as much foot traffic going through some of those schools as there was 15 years ago. But that kid's going to be a very, very good player at Texas Tech at wide receiver. I'm going to find the kid I'm talking about.
There's another guy at AJ Milwee went to see a guy, I think, at Estacado, too, in Lubbock.
Bobby Ross, he's a 25.
Okay.
But this offensive line guy is going to be he's a top national guy. He's a guy that I looked at and said, okay, this guy has a career in football if he does it right. I'll find him and get that name.
And he's at Permian or Odessa High, you said?
He's actually probably at Odessa High. I'm about to bring him up in a second.
You know what, the school that gets me every time is the Amarillo Paladuro School. They sometimes have guys that just out of nowhere, Jerry.
Yes. Or Tascosa.
Tascosa. I mean, it's interesting. Amarillo is an interesting town up there because they don't have a lot. But when they have somebody, they have somebody.
Yeah.
That's the thing about East Texas.
All right, Jerry, while you're looking that up, I am going to go to some team questions, and we are going to go back to the OnTexasFootball.com forums. And Houston, Texas Horn says, what are you guys putting your money on, over or under 10.5 wins? And, of course, Vegas came out with their SEC totals over the weekend, and they have Texas tabbed at 10.5. So would you guys take the over or the under?
I would probably go under right now until I find out who they get on defense, on the defensive line, and see what they add maybe as a punter. But if you actually want to know the truth, I wouldn't bet right now. I'd wait until April and find out who they get because I think they're going to get someone, but I'm one of those prove it to me guys. And so get back to me around May 15th, and then I might be willing to bet that.
So I'm going over, but that's counting a bowl game or playoff. So it's actually Midland High. I was incorrect. Last name is Primus. I can't pronounce his first name, but he's about 6'4", 320, is a true guard, powerful, quick, powerful, long arm guy, getting some Power 5 offers. Midland High 2026 offensive lineman will be a national guy for sure.
All right, fellas, this next question here is from Horn 7. Any portal takes after the spring? Bobby, obviously you just talked about defensive tackle, but do y'all see them adding any other positions besides maybe punter?
Yeah, punter and defensive tackle. I would say this, never say never, and I'd also knock on wood, no injuries. So barring injuries or Will Johnson, a guy like him, a top 10 pick going in the portal. So there's a couple caveats: injuries and super freaks going into the portal, like Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan. Texas has 2 really good corners right now, guys. They don't, but if a top 10 pick goes in the portal, a top 10 pick goes in the portal. You know what I mean? You have to look at that. Okay. And so that's part of it. But otherwise, I only suspect a defensive tackle and possibly a punter at this point.
And then while we're talking about the portal, Greg Jackson says, are there any UCLA guys that Texas could possibly target? I'm assuming that there will be guys hitting the portal. I sure would, he says.
Well, it'll be interesting. Do we know? Have we heard any names?
Yes.
DeAnton Lynn, who was the DC, who's now the DC at USC. That seems like a smart hire by UCLA. That might keep some of that intact. But obviously, the D tackle at UCLA, it would be one.
Jay Toya is his name. 6'4", 325 or 6'3", 325. Jay Toya. And the question I have is, if it gets to that point, would Texas take 2 defensive tackles? Because I'm here to tell you that would be 3 defensive tackles. They took 3 wide receivers in the portal. I think that if one of those guys at Michigan breaks free, I think Texas is going to be all in there. I mean, you never know.
I mean,
they're in a window right now. I think Texas is in a window with the quarterbacks, so they're gonna try to be aggressive.
And look, it kind of goes back to, yes, there's a 12-team playoff, but that means it's going to be harder to win a national championship, by the way, moving forward in college football. But we go back to the Super Bowl last night with the 49ers. They've had 2 looks at it, right? And they haven't got it yet. And you never truly know. And Texas got that first taste of it last year. And Sark feels like we left something on the table. And you never know how many really looks you're going to get at it. So I think there is a sense of urgency right now with the roster they have and where it's headed. I think 2 things. If Texas takes 2 D linemen out of the portal, after the spring, that means some of the young guys are not making the moves they wanted to make. That's going to be a telltale sign. I mean,
not just one, not just a couple, but Bledsoe and Mitchell in particular.
And Mitchell, those 2 guys.
I don't think it's necessarily an indictment one way or the other on Alex January, because I think you can't expect
the guys in year 2 and year 3 in the program. Yeah. If they think those are capable, really good players, and those guys have taken a big step, maybe they only take 1 out of the portal. If they take 2, that means some of those guys are not at the level they think they need them at to go compete for a national championship.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think is going to impact Texas so much next year, the season, when we're talking about win totals and things like that, is, can Colin Simmons as an edge rusher bring what Anthony Hill did as a linebacker, as a true freshman? Who out of this freshman class we talk about the portal. We know those wide receivers are going to be impactful guys, not just at wide receiver, but punt return, kickoff return with Golden and Bolden, which I like. Golden and Bolden, that should be a shirt or something. But look, Colin Simmons is an edge rusher. Can he have that type of impact we've seen some of the other freshmen have? Not Kelvin Banks, okay? That was rare because Texas had to have him be really good and had to play him, just had to throw him to the wolves. But can you do what Anthony Hill? Can you have that type of impact? I mean, how many of these guys in this freshman class? You have 17 early enrollees. Is somebody like a Phil Sami going to be, because he came in the spring, better than even what the staff thought he was going to be? Could he exceed their expectation? Remember when Earl Thomas was recruited to Texas, Matt Brown, Will Muschamp, all those guys will tell you, we knew he was good. We didn't know he was this good. Texas needs a couple of those guys. You need to hear Sark in the spring say, we knew this guy was good. We didn't know he was this good. If you have 2 or 3 freshmen get into that category after spring practice, the win totals can even start to adjust a little more.
Both of you mentioned the portal wide receivers, which actually leads me to my next question here from Fresh 6473. If Sark names Cook, Golden, and Bond as the starting wide receivers for the 24 season, do you think you could see guys like Moore and Niblett go to the portal?
Yes.
Yeah. I think what I've said this before. I think what's really why these blue bloods are in such a power position in college football right now is, look, the portal. Anybody that faces adversity that wants to hit the portal can hit the portal, right? So I think when you have these loaded rosters nowadays, you find out who's really bought into patience in development, who's not just in it for the instant gratification on the field. And so I think that makes your roster churn even better for these blue bloods. And okay, who's really bought in, trusts us to develop them, sees that it might take them a little time, is still putting in the work with a Torrey Becton or a Chris Jackson, and really has his eyes on the prize down the line, or who's out for right now, because everybody develops on different timelines. So I think if for the power programs, they're even in a better position than they were, because the guys they get there and they knew were talented, but after a year, they're like, man, this isn't going to work. Okay, well, fine. That's fine. But the one guy, if one of those two guys stays and one leaves, then you'll know who's invested long-term and really is out to maximize his potential at the University of Texas. It's a great spot to be in if you're Sark.
By the way, speaking of more, he has a food truck now, Jive Turkey, there in Austin. So you can go check that out if you're in the Austin area and support more. Sandman 23, which game carries more weight for the Horns in 24, the Red River or the Lone Star Showdown?
Stop with the Lone Star Showdown. It's Texas versus A&M and Texas versus OU. I don't get with these names. I know they want it because they want to sell the naming rights. It's Texas versus A&M. It's Texas OU. I don't – Red River Showdown, Red River rivalry. Well, we had too many gunshots. Let's call it this. I mean, give me a break. It's Texas OU. It's the Cotton Bowl. It's Texas A&M home and away, period.
I would say Oklahoma next year because Oklahoma won.
No way. I mean, dude, you're rekindling the rivalry with A&M.
Hey, Brent Venables and Stutzman celebrated on social media. Like, I mean, just name it. That game's – and it's the first game. Now, I'll say this. If Oklahoma beat Texas a second year in a row next year, then the A&M game takes on even more. But the return of the rivalry, I get what you're saying, Bobby, but that Oklahoma was a heartbreaker last year.
Is there going to be a game that an A&M person wants to win more than that in the last?
Oh, not A&M. No. Oh, no, not A&M. But Texas
last 100 years, is there going to be more? I mean, no, because Texas has had eternal scoreboard for 13 years.
Well, let's ask the chat. Let's ask the chat. Rank these 4 games next year if you're a Texas fan. Or actually let's say 4, okay? At Michigan, I'm throwing in there's a 4. It's going to be 4. Would you rather beat Georgia, who will probably have won 48 of 50 games? Would you rather beat Georgia, Oklahoma, A&M, in what order? To me, Georgia's got to be number 1 next year, because if you beat Kirby Smart and Austin, Bobby, that's the program in college football right now. That means you beat Alabama 2 years ago at Bama, and you beat Georgia in year 1 in the SEC. So rank those 4. So Ryan Nelson, OU, Georgia, Michigan, A&M. I think it's a great conversation. For A&M fans, it's Texas.
So I got to say, first of all, I am happy finally that we get to talk like this.
Yes.
Okay. Because when we were in the Big 12, oh, what's the big game? Oh, Iowa State's coming. Woo! I mean, that now you've got Georgia coming, you got Florida coming, you got, I mean, even the teams that you don't necessarily think of are actually good. My take on it is OU and A&M are just different and set aside from the rest of the schedule.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, if the Texas football coach doesn't see it that way, he'll figure it out real quick.
I'll say this.
Michigan, yada, yada, yada. Great. If you're the head coach at Texas, you better figure out OU, and you better figure out A&M. Y'all can talk about which one's the best one this year, that year. OU, A&M. Figure it out. Sark, your job. I mean, ask Ryan Day which one's the most important, and he didn't have a choice. Yeah. He beats them all except for Michigan.
Well, somebody said A&M long term. Kelly, hey, I agree with this. So I think where Texas is at this year, I think is so interesting. If Texas wins at Michigan, which I think they'll be the favorite to win at Michigan. There's just so much change there from so many guys leaving for the NFL, coaching staff. If you beat Alabama, if you wanted Alabama, Michigan, and beat Georgia in a 2-year period, that's pretty strong. Now, I agree moving forward. I think Georgia's actually going to be number one for Oklahoma, or Georgia's going to be 1-2 for Texas fans next year, because I think the perception is that A&M's somewhat irrelevant now because they just haven't had the success. But that's going to come back quickly after, because look, the younger Texas fans, think about the Texas fans in college right now. They haven't been through this rivalry yet. It's going to come back. It may take a couple of years.
I think there's some truth to that. Some of these guys in the chat that aren't talking about A&M, they haven't had the A&M rivalry for 13 years to talk about.
They haven't seen A&M celebrate beating Texas in the state for 364. That's when it comes back, guys. It's not here yet. But now, the most important game for Texas A&M next year is at University of Texas in College Station. No question about it. But for Texas, I think Oklahoma's bigger. And I think for some Texas fans right now, Georgia's is going to be bigger.
Bobby, I think you just found your next community poll question.
What
game's more important, OU or A&M? I think that needs to be the next poll for sure.
And Georgia.
Yeah.
Hey, Bobby. Here's the issue. Texas, Oklahoma is a state versus state rivalry.
Right.
Okay. A&M in Texas is an intrastate rivalry. They are two separate animals. Okay. But they are equally important. You can have co-leaders. Neither one of them are for the national championship per se. They may have national championship implications, but I'm just here to tell you. I mean, you're the head coach at the University of Texas, and
I agree.
You don't have a play for A&M and a play for OU. You're not doing your job. And if I were the AD, I would tell them that.
Now, I agree with Bobby's point, and here's why it's a fascinating conversation. It's a great conversation. Texas got more run out of winning at Alabama last year than they would have got even if they beat Oklahoma last year. Period. So this year, nationally, is different from in-state. Texas is going to be – they're supposed to beat A&M next year. If they beat Georgia with College Game Day there, that's kind of from a national perspective. So if you go talk to all the top football prospects in the country, Georgia's on every list. So Georgia to me is like Alabama last year from a recruiting perspective. Can you imagine the kids that are going to be at the Texas-Georgia game next year? Can you imagine the attendance at that game if it's timely for kids and families to be there? Texas would get the mileage out of beating Georgia in Austin the first year in the SEC. I'm not even sure we can say how much mileage they'd get out of that right now. But it's a fascinating conversation. I agree with Bobby. You have to beat Oklahoma. You have to beat A&M if you're head coach at University of Texas. But I think the national perception's a little different as well.
All right, guys. Well, as you said, Jerry, fascinating conversation for sure. We can carry this conversation over to the ontexasfootball.com message board. So please join us over there if you haven't already. But we got to get out of here, guys. Bobby, real quick, can you tell folks what's on later today?
Yeah, we got Talking Ball later today. We may end up doing Jerry and I did a defensive line breakdown late yesterday after the Super Bowl. We may post that today as well. But visit us if you get a chance and sign up for free on TexasFootball.com. That's on TexasFootball.com. CJ will be over there writing articles today, catching up with you guys, as well as myself and Jerry as well. Again, we also had a little bit of a breaking news piece earlier today. The University of Texas, according to a high-ranking source, not expected to entertain playing any Big 12 schools next year or the foreseeable future in football or basketball. That's what I'm hearing right now from folks on campus there in Austin.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. We definitely appreciate it. As Bobby said, head on over to ontexasfootball.com and join in on the discussion. We also need to thank John Donovan and Longhorn Wealth Management Group, along with Manscaped. So for Bobby Burton and Jerry Hamilton, I'm Blake Monroe, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Hook 'em. Have a good week, guys.